Hello, and I want to just give a shout out to those of you that are going to be logging on and watching this on Facebook or may see this pop up in your feed. This is part of a podcast that we have been doing called Following the Way, basically with the intent of helping us live in devotion to the way of Jesus. And so this is a podcast that is also available on Apple, on Spotify, as well as on our YouTube channel, Landmark Christian Fellowship. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify by searching up LCF Landmark. And so this is episode 17. Welcome. So glad that you can be with us. And I want to talk here for the next little bit about John 9. Been going through the book of John for the last little bit here, pulling out some of the stories and some of the accounts and just seeing what it reveals to us about Jesus, what it reveals to us about following him, and the profound truth that it gives us for our lives. And so I want to look at John 9, asking the question, framing it around, how do I testify about Jesus? Because this is the amazing thing, and the thing I love about John is that he tells the accounts of stories of Jesus, but he'll take a whole chapter, like here in John 9, and unpacks this one event of that we're going to get into that, and he goes into such detail about it. And it's unlike all the other Gospels, and that's one thing about John that I really, really appreciate. And so in John 9, we have this account where Jesus comes upon this blind man on the road. And what's interesting, as opposed to a lot of other accounts, we don't see this man hungering after or searching for Jesus or following him and saying, Son of David, have mercy on me. Like, there's so many accounts of that. There's none of that. In fact, the disciples and Jesus, they come upon this blind man on the road, and the disciples, they ask a question. They say, Rabbi, they say, Jesus, was this man, who sinned? His parents or this man that he was born blind? And Jesus answers him and he says, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. Now, maybe we have to understand some context here to understand why would the disciples ask such a question of Jesus. In those times, it was widely taught by the rabbis that if someone was sick or someone had a disease or were born with a certain way, born blind like this man was, it was because there was sin either in him or in his parents. And so that's why when the disciples come across him with Jesus, this is why it prompts this question. And Jesus says, neither, which we have to understand, would have blown away the disciples because they would have understood, no, someone must have sinned in order for him to be like this. And then this sets in motion this incredible incident where Jesus sets about healing this man. And again, we're not told much at this point about this man's desire for healing. We don't see him following Jesus and going after him. It's more Jesus who takes the initiative out of what the disciples asked him, which is really profound. And you can spend a lot of time even just thinking about that. And not only that, but as opposed to many other accounts where Jesus would simply speak or lay his hands on someone and in an instant they're healed, this time he gets down into the dirt and he says he spits on the ground and he makes saliva with his spit he spits on the ground and makes mud with the saliva that he had spit on the ground. So now I don't even think, just think about how much saliva Jesus must have actually spit in order to make that mud. But what he does is he puts this mud that he's made onto the eyes of the man, and then he goes and tells him, and go now and wash in the pool of Siloam. And so it says that he went and washed and came back seeing. Like in an instant, his blindness is healed, but in a very peculiar way. And then what happens is that it says those neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar. Okay, so now we see, okay, he was not just born blind, he was actually a beggar because of his condition. They're saying, isn't this the man that used to sit and beg? And it was interesting because then there became this sort of conversation about, yeah, it's him. And others are like, no, it's not him. Because they're like, well, how could it be him? Because we remember him like this. And he's like, no, I am that man. And so they said to him, well, then how were your eyes opened? And he answers, the man called Jesus, he made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. He says, and so I went and I washed and I received my sight. And they said to him, okay, so then where is Jesus? And he says, well, I don't know, actually. And so this, obviously, there's a lot going on here. This probably kicks up quite the furor around him. And so they brought him to the Pharisees and they said, like, look what's happened. And now, again, interestingly, and this seems to happen several times throughout the gospel, Jesus healed him on the Sabbath. Big no-no. You don't do any work. That's considered work. You heal them. That's work. You can't do that on the Sabbath. How dare you, Jesus? And then it's like, and he made mud out of saliva and he anointed his eyes. And so the Pharisees, again, they asked him, how had he received his sight? And he said to them, well, he put mud on my eyes and I washed and I see. Simple, right? And immediately the Pharisees say, well, this man, he's not from God. Because he did this on the Sabbath. And there's this huge division among them of, how can a man who's a sinner, because Jesus healed on the Sabbath, i.e. that sin, how could he do such things? And how could he heal a sinner who's obviously has sin? And so they said to him, what do you say about him? Since he's the one who opened your eyes, he's the one who did this to you. What do you say about him? And he said, he is a prophet. So again, this blind man who is now healed, he at this point, he doesn't see Jesus for who he truly is. He says, oh, he's a prophet. Great man, speaking, doing things of God, but he's just a prophet. Now, at this point, the religious leaders are the Jewish people, the Pharisees, and we think it's religious leaders that were around him. They don't believe actually he was born blind because they can't come to the point of admitting that he's been healed, because how could that happen? Because he was blind. So maybe he never was blind and then Jesus didn't really heal him. And so they go to his parents and they want to find out and they want proof. And so they say, is this your son who you say was born blind? How does he now see? And his parents answered and they said, well, we know that this is our son and we know that he was born blind. So yeah, he's our son. He was born blind and, but how he now sees, we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, they say. He's of age. He will speak for himself. Now then it says, this is what John says in brackets. His parents said these things. This is context. Parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be the Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, go and ask him, he's of age. So do we see what's happening here? And we'll just pause for a second. His parents, they know what happened. They know who healed him. They know the extent of the miracle that was done, but they don't want to say anything because it's going to potentially call into question their societal standing, their ability to go into the synagogue, which was all about, this is about their lifestyle. This is about, if we admit what happened here and we admit that Jesus did this, we are going to potentially cause ourselves a lot of problems in society. We don't want to admit, we know what happened, but we don't want to testify to that because there's just too many risks to our lifestyle. There's too many risks to who we are. There's too many risks. What are people going to say about us? What are they going to do to us? And yet, at this point, the Jewish leaders, they still don't have the answer they want. So they go back to the man who was healed and they said to him, give glory to God, meaning you better tell us the truth and then they say, we know that this man is a sinner. And the man answers them. He says, whether he's a sinner, I do not know. One thing that I do know, though, is that I was blind, but now I see. And again, they say to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he said to them, I already told you. You put mud in my eyes. You don't want to listen to that. You don't want to listen. Why? He says, why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? And they're like, and then they get into this thing of, you are his disciple, but we're disciples of Moses. And so again, they're comparing, before it's been comparing Jesus to Abraham. Now they're comparing Jesus to Moses. And this man, what's interesting here in the account is that he goes on the offensive with the religious leaders. And I find that so intriguing because his parents didn't. His parents immediately backed away. His parents said, no, we're not going on a limb to testify to what Jesus has done. It's way too risky. It's going to compromise where we're at. And maybe they felt like they had already dealt with a son who's been born blind and all of the societal stuff with that in the first century Israel, which would have caused them to be maligned. And so maybe it was like, no more. But this man, he doesn't respond the same way. He goes on the offensive, and he gets sarcastic with him. He says, well, this is an amazing thing. You don't know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. So he says, never since the world began has it been heard that anyone has healed someone born blind. So he's saying if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And at this point, after he goes on and he brings the most pertinent, important question saying, look, Jesus did this. You say he's a sinner, so how could he? Or you were questioning at one point if I was healed, but you can't deny that because enough people are testifying that I was a blind man and I'm healed now. And so he basically puts before them going, what you're saying doesn't make sense. And at this point, they say to him, you were born in utter sin and you would teach us. And they cast him out. They resort to the lowest form of judgment. They basically say, you are an utter failure. You're a beggar. You were born into utter sin. How dare you talk to us like this? And that's it. They end the conversation. They cast him out. And it says then in verse 35 of John 9, Jesus heard that they had cast him out. And having found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? Again, interestingly, Jesus doesn't refer to himself like so many do as the Son of David, which was a political term. People were looking for Jesus to overthrow the Romans. No, Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man, a term from the book of Daniel, which is all about the fact that he's the Messiah. He's referring to himself as the Savior. And the man answers him, and who is he, sir? Who is this that you're talking about, that I may believe in him? And Jesus said to him, you have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you. It's amazing because in this moment, Jesus admits as clear as he does to anyone in any of the Gospels. And when he asks him, do you believe in the Son of Man? And because of this man's openness and his willingness to testify for Jesus and what Jesus had done for him, Jesus reveals himself to him in a profound way and with such clarity. And it says then, the man said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him, it says. So something has switched in the man where he had initially said, who is he? He's a prophet. Now he says, no, I recognize that you are the Messiah and I am actually going to worship you. And this is where when we talk about testifying to who Jesus is in our lives, we see here this stark contrast between the boldness of this man and the timidity of his parents who weren't willing to testify to any of the truth that they knew. And it's such a striking and provoking challenge for our lives because this man's willingness to be identified with Jesus, that was the catalyst for Jesus revealing more of himself to him. When we pursue Jesus, when we stand for Jesus, we can be certain that Jesus will reveal more and more of himself to us. It's an incredible promise that we find here in these verses and in this account. And so I want to challenge you and encourage you with that today, is how will you testify to Jesus in your life? Regardless of what others around you say, regardless of where culture is going, regardless of what society says, regardless of how it may make you look, regardless of the consequences of that, will you testify to who Jesus is and what he's done in your life? Because see, when we read earlier in John 9, where it says that this man, they ask who had the sin, was it him or his parents? The disciples asked Jesus. It brings to light the truth that actually we all have sin. Every single one of us. None of us are without sin, the word says. And yet, Jesus, he identified with us. And so it begs the question for us, and it puts before us, how will we testify to what Jesus has done for us? Because even though we were completely undeserving, Jesus died for us. He took our place. And now the question is, how will we testify to this man who has done everything for us? Jesus withheld nothing back for us. And so how will I testify to him? I want to leave you with that. Bless you. Hope that you were encouraged, and we will see you again. I want to encourage you again, if you want, you can check out this podcast on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Search up LCF Landmark, and you'll get our previous episodes. Bless you, and we'll see you again.